there are whispers carried across the corridors of time, echoes of an ancient intelligence that refused to be buried beneath the sands of Egypt. These whispers do not speak of kings or conquest, but of consciousness itself, of a hidden architecture that shapes human perception. They come from a civilization that gazed not only at the stars but also through them, peering into the invisible threads that bind matter and mind. Somewhere within those sacred scrolls, etched in fading ink upon brittle papyrus, lies what many now call the ancient Egyptian secret to escaping the matrix, a teaching that transcends the language of stone and symbol to reach the very mechanics of human reality. To understand what this matrix means in the Egyptian sense, we must first strip away the cinematic illusion the modern world has dressed it in. The matrix, in the ancient mind, was not a computer simulation, but a metaphysical one, the dense veil of perception woven by belief, habit, and fear. It was the world of illusion that the priests of Heliopolis described as isfet, chaos, distortion, and forgetfulness. The initiate's purpose was not to rebel against the matrix but to awaken within it, to realize that the prison walls were made of thought. Escaping the matrix, therefore, was never about departure but transformation, learning to see the divine geometry hidden behind the sensory facade of the world. The Egyptians believed that the human being was not merely flesh, but a layered being composed of subtle energies, Ka, Ba, and Ak, the vital, the soul, and the luminous essence. They saw reality itself as a reflection of consciousness, shaped by the interplay of these invisible currents. What they encoded in their temple rituals and sacred texts was not a religion in the modern sense, but a sophisticated metaphysical science, a guide to remembering who you are beyond the dream. The papyrus we speak of today, decoded by scholars yet truly understood only by the initiated, tells not of gods demanding worship, but of minds awakening from illusion. According to fragments of the Papyrus of Hidden Doors, the initiate was told, "The world is a mirror, and the mirror lies, until you learn to see through your own reflection." It was a warning that perception itself is the grand deceiver. The gods, Thoth, Isis, Osiris, Horus, were not external beings in their truest form, but personifications of cosmic laws and inner archetypes. Thoth, for instance, represented divine intelligence, the logos, the creative word that structures existence. Isis, the eternal feminine principle, symbolized the hidden dimension of truth, veiled by appearances. To escape the matrix was to unite Thoth's knowing with Isis's unveiling, to bridge intellect and intuition until reality itself opened like a lotus before the sun. The pharaohs were not simply rulers of land, they were meant to be rulers of the inner realm. Their crowns, adorned with serpents and solar discs, were symbols of awakened consciousness. The uraeus, or coiled serpent, rising from the brow, was the sign of the kundalini, the serpent power of awareness ascending the spine to ignite divine vision. To wear the crown was to have escaped the matrix, to live as a conscious architect rather than a pawn in the game of illusion. Yet this knowledge, dangerous and liberating, was never written plainly. It was hidden beneath allegory, preserved in mystery schools, and veiled behind the hieroglyphs that only the inner eye could decode. The matrix, as the ancients saw it, was self-created, an elaborate web spun by the mind's attachment to names, forms, and sensations. Every attachment became a thread, and the more one clung to the visible, the more tightly one was woven into the invisible net. Thus, liberation was not an act of rebellion, but of remembrance. The initiate was taught to enter silence, to confront the darkness within the self, and to listen for the voice of Maat, the principle of divine order and truth. Only by aligning with Maat could one begin to dissolve the illusions of the matrix. Modern seekers often imagine escaping the matrix as a heroic act against external control, but the Egyptians taught something subtler, that every individual participates in sustaining the illusion through thought and emotion. The true revolution was inward. They taught that the heart, not the brain, was the seat of consciousness, and that the purity of the heart determined what one perceived as real. In the Book of the Dead, the soul stands before the scales of Maat, and the heart is weighed against the feather of truth. This was not a posthumous judgment, it was an eternal process occurring in every moment. The lighter the heart, the freer the soul, and the more clearly one could see through the matrix of appearances. The Decoded Papyrus is not a map in the geographic sense, it is a mirror, a set of instructions for inner alchemy. Its symbols are not meant to be understood intellectually but experienced. The initiate was guided through stages of inner death and rebirth, mirroring Osiris's descent and resurrection. Each step dissolved the layer of illusion, until the seeker could finally stand in the blazing clarity of the sun, realizing that the matrix was never a trap, but a training ground, a field for awakening consciousness. And so, when we speak today of escaping the matrix, we are not describing a flight from the world, but a transmutation of how we see and engage with it. The Egyptians did not teach escape through denial, but through deep seeing. Their wisdom invites us to step out of linear time and enter the eternal now, to remember that what we call reality is the dream of the soul, and that to awaken is simply to dream lucidly. The sands may have buried their temples, but the vibration of their knowing still hums beneath the modern noise. The Decoded Papyrus is not a relic, it is a mirror waiting for your gaze. It whispers that freedom is not in rejecting the world but in decoding it, not in fleeing illusion but in mastering its patterns. To truly grasp the core of the Egyptian teachings on escaping the matrix, one must understand that their worldview was not fragmented. It did not divide the sacred and the mundane, the visible and the invisible, or the mortal and the divine. For them, everything was part of a continuum, a great living fabric that pulsed with consciousness. The illusion of separation, which we today call the matrix, was the first veil to be pierced. The priests and initiates of old called it Khepru, the realm of becoming, the ever-changing mask worn by the eternal. To live solely within Khepru was to be lost in motion, tossed by the tides of form and desire. But to awaken within it, to recognize the unseen stillness that moves all things, was to step beyond the matrix into the mind of Ra, the eternal sun that never sets. At the center of the Egyptian metaphysical map stood one radiant idea, that all life emanates from a single source, and that this source expresses itself through patterns of light and sound. The Logos, the divine word, was not merely a concept, it was the structure of reality itself. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, was said to have written the universe into being through the sacred language of vibration. Every hieroglyph, every chant, every symbol was a code, a resonant frequency that could alter perception. To the uninitiated, these were decorations, to the awakened, they were keys to reality. The papyrus we call Decoded is not about information, but transformation. It tells us that to escape the matrix, one must learn to vibrate differently, to think, speak, and feel in harmony with the frequency of truth. At the heart of this teaching was Maat, the goddess of truth, balance, and cosmic order. To live according to Maat was to align one's inner world with the universal rhythm. Maat was not merely morality, she was metaphysical alignment. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions resonated with her principle, you could move freely through the illusion without being bound by it. The Egyptians saw each lie, each distortion, each unbalanced emotion as a chain that tied the soul to the matrix. Thus, to escape was to restore balance, to bring light where there was distortion, to bring harmony where there was discord. The process was not one of rebellion but of resonance. This leads us to another profound concept, Duat, the inner realm of transformation. Duat was often mistaken for the land of the dead, but in truth, it represented the domain of consciousness that lies beneath waking awareness. Every night, the sun god Ra was said to descend into the Duat, battling serpents of chaos, only to rise again renewed. This was not mythology, it was metaphor. Each human soul undergoes this journey daily, descending into unconsciousness, facing its fears and shadows, and emerging with new light. To escape the matrix, one had to descend willingly into their own do-it, to confront the illusions that bind them. Fear, anger, greed, and pride were not enemies but teachers, manifestations of Isfet, the principle of disorder that tests the soul's clarity. Another vital theme encoded in the papyrus was the concept of Ka and Ba, two complementary aspects of the self. The Ka was the vital essence, the life force that sustains the body and connects it to the earth. The Ba was the soul's individuality, capable of traveling beyond form, symbolized by the bird with a human head. The secret of the initiates was learning to merge these two into the Ak, the luminous, immortal self. This fusion was the true escape, not from the world, but from fragmentation. When Ka and Ba unite, consciousness becomes whole, the individual awakens as a radiant being, both in and beyond the matrix. The Egyptians depicted this state as a star in the heavens, one who shines eternally because they have remembered their divine origin. Every ritual, every carving, every temple alignment with the stars was designed to reinforce this cosmic remembrance. The architecture itself was a teaching tool. The Great Pyramid, for example, was not simply a tomb, it was a map of initiation. The initiate entered in darkness, symbolizing ignorance, and ascended through narrow passages toward the king's chamber, the chamber of illumination. Inside, surrounded by resonant stone, one would experience the collapse of illusion, the realization that death itself was a doorway. The papyrus mirrors this same journey inward. It guides the reader to move from sensory dependence toward inner illumination, from sleepwalking through life to lucid awareness. Underlying all of this is a principle the Egyptians called Heka, the power of the creative word, the magical force of consciousness itself. Heka is not the magic of superstition, but the capacity of consciousness to shape experience. Every thought is an act of Heka, every belief, a spell that defines what one perceives. To live unconsciously is to be caught in the spells of others, to speak words without awareness and thus reinforce the matrix. To awaken is to reclaim one's voice, to speak as Thoth spoke, with intention and clarity, shaping reality instead of being shaped by it. The Decoded Papyrus therefore is a manual of inner alchemy, teaching that by purifying speech, thought, and intention, one begins to rewrite the matrix itself. But none of these principles stand alone. The genius of Egyptian metaphysics was its unity. Maat, Heka, Do-it, Ka, Ba, all were expressions of the same truth, that consciousness is the builder, and perception the architecture. To escape the matrix is to remember that you are the architect, to shift from identifying with the dream to recognizing yourself as the dreamer. The hieroglyphs, the chants, the temple walls, all whisper the same message: you are the scribe of your own reality. Write wisely. Thus, the ancient Egyptian secret is not a doctrine but a process of awakening. It invites each seeker to look beyond the veil, to realize that the prison is self-created and the key has always been within. The papyrus serves as a mirror that reflects one's own entrapment in illusion, and one's capacity to transcend it through awareness, balance, and vibration. The Egyptians did not teach through abstraction, they taught through story, symbol, and ritual drama. They understood that truth, when spoken too plainly, loses its power. It must be felt, not merely known, lived, not merely understood. Thus, the great myths of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Set were never simply tales of gods and revenge, they were psychological maps, mirrors of the soul's journey through illusion, death, and awakening. The Decoded Papyrus reveals that these myths were designed as multidimensional teachings, each symbol vibrating with hidden meaning that could open gateways within the initiate's mind. Consider the story of Osiris, the king who was dismembered by his brother Set and restored by his wife, Isis. On the surface, it speaks of betrayal and resurrection, but beneath it lies the blueprint of escaping the matrix. Osiris represents consciousness itself, whole, radiant, divine. Set symbolizes fragmentation, the principle of separation that shatters unity into countless illusions. When Set tears Osiris apart, it is the cosmic act of consciousness descending into form, forgetting its wholeness. Each part of Osiris's body scattered across Egypt represents the scattered fragments of awareness lost in the physical world, the many identities we wear, the masks we believe in. Isis, the devoted consort, is the power of remembrance, the intuitive force that gathers the pieces of the divine self. She is the yearning within every soul that longs to return home. Her magic is not external sorcery, it is the alchemy of love and attention, the capacity to see through illusion and recall the forgotten truth. When Isis breathes life back into Osiris, she reawakens the sleeping consciousness, and from their union is born Horus, the enlightened awareness that transcends both illusion and memory. Horus, the falcon-headed child of resurrection, is the one who sees from above, the observer who perceives the matrix without being trapped by it. This myth, repeated endlessly in temple walls, was not to be worshipped but enacted within. The initiate became Osiris, facing dismemberment, the breaking apart of the ego's illusion. Through meditation, silence, and symbolic death rituals, they experienced the collapse of identity, the terror of losing all form. And yet, through Isis, the higher intuition, they found remembrance. When the parts of the self were gathered and harmonized, Horus was born within them, the pure vision that sees truth as it is. The matrix, then, was not destroyed, it was seen through, its architecture illuminated by the light of understanding. Another narrative within the Decoded Papyrus speaks of Ra's night journey through the Duat, the underworld. Each night, the sun god descended into the darkness, sailing upon his bark through 12 gates guarded by serpents and shadow beings. To the untrained eye, this was a tale of cosmic routine. To the initiate, it was the story of consciousness moving through the subconscious, the path of transformation through the inner realms. Each gate represented a level of illusion, a layer of fear or attachment. The serpents symbolized the primal forces of creation, neutral in essence, but deadly when resisted. Ra's victory was not achieved by fighting the darkness, but by illuminating it. His weapon was light, his courage the knowing that darkness itself was only unrecognized light. Each dawn, when Ra emerged renewed, he was not escaping the night but transmuting it, turning shadow into fuel for rebirth. In this, the Egyptians encoded the eternal truth: the matrix is not an enemy to be defeated but a labyrinth to be understood. The way out is not through avoidance, but illumination. The papyrus also tells of Thoth and the mirror of creation. It is said that Thoth once crafted a mirror so perfect it could reflect not appearances, but essence. When a soul gazed into this mirror, it saw not its face but its truth. Yet many who looked upon it went mad, for they could not bear the sight of their own illusions dissolving. Only those who had balanced their hearts upon the scales of Maat could look into the mirror and remain whole. For them, the reflection became a doorway, an exit from the matrix of appearances into the radiant reality of the Akh, the light body. This mirror, according to the text, was later hidden, not in a temple or a tomb, but in the human mind itself. Every thought is a mirror, Thoth inscribed in invisible letters, and the pure of heart will find the reflection that frees them. Here lies one of the deepest secrets of the papyrus, that the true escape from the matrix is achieved not by breaking through external barriers, but by purifying perception. The clearer the mirror of the mind, the more accurately it reflects the divine light, and the less power illusion holds. Even the weighing of the heart, that most iconic Egyptian image, conceals this same metaphysical truth. The heart, symbol of consciousness, is weighed against the feather of Maat. If it is heavy, burdened with deceit, fear, or attachment, it sinks, and the soul remains bound to the matrix of form. But if it is light, free from distortion, it rises into the realm of Akh, where thought becomes creation and the dreamer awakens. The ceremony was not a judgment after death but a continual process within life itself. Each moment we are weighed, each thought and emotion tipping the scale toward freedom or bondage. In all these stories, the theme repeats like a sacred rhythm: descent, dissolution, remembrance, and rebirth. The matrix, in Egyptian philosophy, was not a punishment but a process, a divine game of forgetfulness through which consciousness discovers itself anew. Every illusion, every trial, every fragment of darkness was a part of the grand initiation. The gods were not outside forces, but archetypal energies within the human psyche, guiding each soul through the spiral of awakening. To read these myths literally is to stay asleep. To read them symbolically is to feel the pulse of something eternal moving beneath the words. The Egyptians did not write for the eyes, they wrote for the inner ear, the part of you that remembers before you were born. The papyrus whispers to that part now, telling you that you are both the dreamer and the dream, both the prisoner and the key. When you finally see that truth, the matrix dissolves like mist before the rising sun. It is one thing to contemplate the mystery and another to embody it. The ancient Egyptians never intended their teachings to remain confined to temple walls or papyrus scrolls. They were meant to transform the daily life of the initiate. For them, spirituality was not an abstract pursuit but a lived practice, a continual refinement of perception. The Decoded Papyrus does not end with cosmic symbolism, it descends again into the world of form, offering guidance on how to walk through the matrix with eyes open. It whispers that the great work of liberation begins not in distant realms, but in the most ordinary moments, in how you breathe, speak, think, and love. To the Egyptians, the greatest illusion was the belief that divinity and daily life were separate. They called the world Ta, the field of experience, and saw it as a sacred laboratory where the soul could test its awareness. Every interaction was a mirror, every challenge a hieroglyph waiting to be read. To escape the matrix was not to flee from the world, but to recognize the world as the reflection of one's own inner state. If your environment appeared chaotic, it was a call to bring harmony within. If life seemed stagnant, it was the soul asking you to awaken movement. This was the living application of Maat, balance as an active force, not a static rule. The Egyptians practiced this through ritual as conscious action. Ritual was not superstition, it was a technology of focus. Lighting a lamp to Ra at dawn was not an act of worship but of alignment. It reminded the initiate that every sunrise outside corresponds to a sunrise within, the continual renewal of awareness. Each chant to Thoth was a recalibration of thought, each offering to Maat a reaffirmation of truth. These rituals train the mind to remain awake within the matrix, to live intentionally rather than mechanically. In modern life, the same principle applies. Each moment of mindfulness, each conscious breath, each truthful word, functions as a miniature ritual, a moment of re-entry into presence. The papyrus would say, "Make your life your temple, let every act be sacred." A crucial part of escaping illusion was mastery over Heka, the power of speech and thought. The Egyptians understood language as a living force. To speak was to create. Every word uttered shaped vibration, and every vibration reshaped perception. Negative words, careless thoughts, or untruths thicken the matrix, distorting the mirror of reality. To live in alignment with truth, one had to refine one's language, not through censorship, but through awareness. Before speaking, the initiate would ask, "Does this word build or break the harmony of Maat?" Today, this same awareness can liberate the modern seeker from the constant hypnosis of media, gossip, and fear-based narratives. The words you consume and express determine the frequency of your consciousness, and thus the version of the matrix you inhabit. Another principle carried from the temples into practical life was the cultivation of the heart. In Egyptian cosmology, the heart, IB, was the throne of consciousness. It was not simply an organ but an instrument of perception, capable of discerning truth directly. The intellect could reason, but only the heart could know. Thus, the initiate was trained to listen inwardly, to allow intuition to become the guide rather than intellect alone. This was the real meaning of the weighing of the heart. To keep it light, one had to live authentically, free from resentment, deceit, or unnecessary attachments. In modern terms, escaping the matrix means refining emotional intelligence, cultivating empathy, forgiveness, and presence until your inner life mirrors the balance of Maat. The Egyptians also understood attention as currency. Wherever awareness was placed, energy flowed. The matrix feeds on distraction, on the mind's tendency to scatter itself across endless stimuli. The priests taught concentration as a sacred art. In meditation, they visualized the eye of Horus, perfectly still and all-seeing, symbolizing the awakened observer who no longer identifies with every thought. To practice such seeing today is to withdraw from the mechanical trance of constant consumption. When you take back your attention, you reclaim your creative power. The world around you begins to reorganize, reflecting your newfound coherence. The papyrus also speaks of silence as gateway. Thoth's greatest teaching was not in words but in pauses between them. In silence, the layers of the matrix become audible, the subtle machinery of thought and emotion that constructs reality. The ancient initiate entered the silence of the inner chambers not to escape the world but to perceive its code. Likewise, in modern life, silence, true inner stillness, is the most direct access point to what lies beyond illusion. It is there, beneath the noise, that the voice of the eternal can be heard. Practical integration, then, becomes a living art, aligning speech with Heka, emotion with Maat, attention with Horus, and silence with Thoth. The ancients were not merely philosophers, they were engineers of consciousness. Their temples were blueprints for the human mind, their papyri, coded operating manuals for reality itself. They taught that the matrix could be mastered not by force but by coherence, by harmonizing the inner triad of thought, feeling, and action. When these three become one, the illusion loses its hold, and reality begins to bend toward clarity. This integration naturally extends into how one relates to others. The Egyptians saw every relationship as a reflection of the self, a chance to practice Maat in motion. When you treat another with respect, you affirm the divine in them and dissolve the illusion of separation. When you act with compassion, you reclaim the fragments of Osiris scattered through humanity. The world itself begins to shift in subtle ways, because you are no longer participating in the vibration of fragmentation. Escaping the matrix, then, is not isolation from others but union through awareness. Finally, the Decoded Papyrus offers an insight profoundly relevant to our modern condition. The matrix is sustained by unconscious agreement. Every time we accept fear as truth, judgment as justice, or chaos as inevitable, we sign an invisible contract with illusion. To withdraw that agreement is to awaken. The Egyptians taught that the true magician, the awakened one, changes reality not by rebellion, but by refusal to feed the false. To see through the illusion without hatred is the highest mastery. The world changes when perception changes, and perception changes when one remembers their divinity. Thus, the practical path of escape is neither rejection nor ascension, it is remembrance. It is to live with a heart as light as a feather, a mind as still as the sun at noon, and a spirit that recognizes the divine play in all things. The matrix continues to exist, but it no longer defines you. You walk within it as the ancients did, awake, aware, and free. The journey through the wisdom of the ancients leads not to an ending, but to a revelation, a remembering. The Egyptians never spoke of enlightenment as something newly attained, they described it as Zep Tepi, the first time, the return to the primordial state before illusion began. To escape the matrix, then, is to return to what has always been true, that consciousness is eternal, reality is malleable, and the divine spark within you is not a fragment of light lost in the dark, but the source of light itself. The Decoded Papyrus does not offer salvation, it offers remembrance. It reminds you that you were never truly trapped, only dreaming that you were. When the ancients spoke of awakening, they described it as the opening of the eye of Horus, not the physical eye, but the inner vision that sees through appearances. This eye, once open, perceives unity beneath multiplicity. It looks upon the world and recognizes the divine geometry behind every movement, every being, every breath. To live from this awareness is to become lucid within the dream, to act with intention, to feel with presence, to create with harmony. You no longer seek escape because the matrix itself becomes transparent, its patterns are no longer prisons but pathways of understanding. In the light of this realization, the teachings of Maat, Thoth, and Isis converge. Maat reminds you that truth is not a fixed point but a living rhythm. Thoth teaches that every word, every thought, is an act of creation, a ripple in the sea of being. And Isis, the eternal mother of remembrance, whispers that love is the great dissolver of illusion, the force that gathers all lost fragments of the self into wholeness again. To live these principles is to enact the great resurrection of Osiris within your own consciousness, to awaken as Horus, the shining child of light who sees but is not deceived. The transformation begins subtly, in perception itself. You begin to notice that the external world mirrors your inner state with uncanny precision. The more you dwell in clarity, the more harmony unfolds around you. The old dramas lose their gravity, conflict softens into comprehension. The matrix no longer feels like an adversary, it becomes a teaching mechanism, an intelligent reflection designed to show you where you still hold distortion. The world becomes your temple, and every experience your initiation. This is the alchemy of awakening, to transmute reaction into response, chaos into order, shadow into illumination. The Decoded Papyrus calls upon every seeker not to withdraw from the world, but to return to it renewed. The initiate who emerges from the inner chambers does not remain in solitude but steps into the sunlight with new eyes. They bring the wisdom of the unseen into the seen, becoming a living bridge between realms. In this state, work, relationship, art, and even struggle become sacred expressions of consciousness unfolding itself. The ancient priests knew this truth well, that awakening is not an escape from responsibility but its fulfillment. To remember who you are is to remember your role as co-creator, as maintainer of Maat in both the inner and outer worlds. This remembrance carries with it a deep compassion. Once you awaken, you see that all beings are walking through their own labyrinths of illusion, each one at a different stage of recognition. You no longer judge the sleepers, for you understand the beauty and necessity of their dreaming. Every soul must wander until it is ready to wake. Your role is not to force them awake but to hold light steady, like the sun that rises without demand, offering illumination freely. The Egyptians honored this principle as the path of Ra, to shine because it is your nature, not because you seek reward. In this way, the final secret of escaping the matrix unfolds. It is not flight, but illumination. You do not step out of the illusion by destroying it, but by becoming so radiant that illusion can no longer bind you. The matrix dissolves not in battle but in brilliance. The papyrus closes with a simple yet profound line: he who remembers becomes the light that no shadow can contain. These words encapsulate the culmination of the entire journey, the merging of the seeker and the sought, the dissolution of boundaries between the divine and the human. And so, you stand now where countless initiates once stood, on the threshold between forgetting and remembrance. The ancient halls of consciousness open not through stone doors but through awareness itself. The question is no longer how to escape the matrix, but how to live within it as one who knows. The truth is not hidden, it is waiting behind every breath, every thought, every act of stillness. The initiation continues not in Egypt's sands but in the corridors of your own mind, each choice a hieroglyph, each moment a gate. The transformational call of this teaching is simple: remember. Remember that you are the architect of perception. Remember that every thought you think inscribes the reality you walk through. Remember that your heart, when aligned with truth, becomes lighter than the feather of Maat and rises beyond limitation. Remember that silence speaks louder than noise, that love dissolves illusion, and that light recognizes itself even in the deepest shadow. When you remember, the ancient papyrus ceases to be an artifact, it becomes a living document written in your own consciousness. You realize that the priests, the gods, the hieroglyphs, and the temples were never separate from you. They were fragments of your own higher memory, calling across millennia to awaken themselves within you. The matrix you sought to escape transforms into the tapestry of your own creation, a masterpiece of divine imagination. So step forward, awaken one, into the dawn of your own awareness. Walk as the pharaohs did, not as rulers of men, but as masters of mind. Let your gaze be steady as Horus's, your words shaped with the wisdom of Thoth, your heart balanced by Maat, and your compassion flowing from the eternal embrace of Isis. The world will not end when you awaken, it will begin again, luminous and alive, because now you finally see it as it truly is. The papyrus has been decoded. The door stands open. The matrix dissolves in the radiance of your remembrance. Awaken and walk in light.